In this chapter, we continue with the cardiovascular system and focus in on the blood vessels. We know blood vessels' job is to distribute blood throughout the body. And we know there are different types of blood vessels: arteries, veins, and capillaries. But now we're going to take a look at their detailed structure, their function involved with distributing blood, maintaining blood pressure, and then finally we look at specific blood vessels and their names and their locations. But this slide is going to talk about the tissue level of blood vessels. So looking at blood vessels, they're made up of different tissues that are found in 3 layers. These layers are known as tunics. The inner layer is called the tunica interna. The middle layer with muscle is called the tunica media. And then the outer layer, largely of connective tissue, is called the tunica externa. So we're going to compare an artery with a vein and a capillary. I think we know the function of each of these. Arteries send blood away from the heart towards an organ or tissue. Capillaries are found inside organs and tissues, allowing exchange to occur. And then finally, the veins are going to bring that blood back towards the heart. But let's look at the layers, the tunics. The inner tunic, the tunica interna, is very similar in all 3 blood vessels. There's an endothelium, which lines the inside of the blood vessel. It is made up of a simple squamous epithelium, so single layer flat cells, and it's held in place with a basement membrane. That is true for all blood vessels. All blood vessels have an endothelium and a basement membrane. In fact, if you look at a capillary, that's all a capillary has. The artery then will have a layer of elastic connective tissue in its tunica interna, whereas the other blood vessels do not. Then we get to the tunica media, and that's where you see a dramatic difference in the 3 blood vessels. Arteries have much more muscle, much more smooth muscle. That's going to allow them to adjust their lumen diameter. The lumen is where the blood is. Veins have very little muscle, but they can still alter the size of their lumen just a bit. And then capillaries have no smooth muscle. The artery has another layer of elastic connective tissue in it. And then there's the outer tunica externa, which just helps to hold the blood vessel in place. So the basic differences between the 3 are: arteries have more elasticity to allow them to adjust in response to pressure changes. Arteries have more contractility to adjust the size of their lumen. We call that vasoconstriction and vasodilation. This is very useful in regulating blood flow. So what organ needs more blood is going to have arteries that might vasodilate to deliver more blood. If we have to adjust that blood flow and reduce blood flow, arteries will vasoconstrict. This is also extremely important in regulating your overall blood pressure, which we'll talk more about later in this PowerPoint. So those are the key differences. And then you'll notice on the inside of veins, veins will typically have little valves. So these are kind of outpouchings of the endothelium. And this allows proper blood flow. Blood is under a very low pressure in veins. So in order to prevent that blood from maybe pooling or going backwards, these valves, these venous valves, help maintain proper blood flow. And recall that those capillaries are very simple. It's just an endothelium surrounded by a basement membrane. So let's review. Arteries carry blood away from the heart towards organs. Arteries come in a couple different types. They could be very elastic in order to withstand more pressure, or they're muscular arteries. The elastic arteries get a lot of blood directly from the heart, and therefore the pressure is very high and they have to be very elastic to withstand that pressure. So for example, the aorta is an elastic artery. Arteries that distribute blood to organs are more of the muscular type because they need to be able to adjust how much blood flow an organ is getting. So a couple different types of arteries based on whether they have more elastic connective tissue or more muscle. Arteries eventually will branch into many arterioles. So these are the smaller arteries found within tissues and organs. And these, although small, have the most dramatic impact on blood pressure because there's just so many of them throughout the entire body. So when your arterioles constrict, that keeps pressure up. When your arterioles dilate, that reduces blood pressure. So arterioles are small arteries but extremely important. They lead to capillaries, and capillaries are going to be able to do exchange between the blood and tissue cells, whether it's gases, oxygen and CO2, or nutrients and waste, or delivery of hormones. Capillaries allow exchange. Capillaries will then lead to venules or small veins that are found in the tissues, and those will begin to merge together to form the larger veins, which will carry that blood back towards the heart. You'll notice these colors are representing levels of oxygen, and if the arteries are oxygenated, then these must be the systemic blood vessels. Pulmonary blood vessels are similar, except the type of blood found within them. Recall that pulmonary arteries are deoxygenated and pulmonary veins are oxygenated. Capillaries are going to be able to regulate how much blood is in them. So these are a couple drawings of capillary networks where you'll have an arteriole supplying a capillary network, but there's methods to regulate how much blood flow is going to go through these capillaries. So the idea here is you need to be able to adjust how much blood goes to certain organs. If an organ is upregulated, like a skeletal muscle when you're exercising, you're going to want more blood flowing through that muscle. So there are tiny little sphincters called precapillary sphincters that will relax and allow blood flow through these capillaries. And you can thoroughly oxygenate and deliver nutrients to this organ. At rest, when you don't need as much blood flow, these precapillary sphincters can contract and reduce how much blood is flowing through this organ or tissue. So this is one important way that blood vessels, in particular the kind of arterial level, can adjust how much blood is entering capillaries. Capillaries themselves have a few different varieties, so not every capillary is the same throughout your body. The most abundant capillaries we call continuous capillaries. They're the ones found in your skin and your muscle. They have a simple squamous epithelium surrounded by a basement membrane, and we can do exchange either right through the cells or in between the cells. And that little gap in between the cells are known as intercellular clefts. Not intracellular, intercellular. Inter means in between. So these are the little gaps in between cells. So those are found throughout the body. Some organs need to have a slightly modified capillary called fenestrated capillaries. A fenestration is a hole or a pore, and these holes are right through the endothelial cells. So what these capillaries allow is a little more exchange than a normal continuous capillary could do. So these pores increase their permeability. That means it's easier to exchange materials, fluid, through these capillaries. And there's a number of organs that have them: kidneys, small intestine, and many of our endocrine organs. I want to focus on the kidneys because I think we can better understand why. Kidneys filter your blood. Kidneys are their most important job is to remove waste from your blood and remove anything that you have in excess from your blood. And in order to do that efficiently, the kidney has fenestrated capillaries. So at a kidney, we can remove large amounts of waste if necessary. We can remove more water if we are retaining too much water. So in order to allow a little bit more exchange or filtration, those kidneys have fenestrated capillaries. Third type of capillary called sinusoid capillaries. These have even larger holes than the fenestrated capillaries. And this allows larger things to move in or out of the capillary. So let's look at the three organs, and you should understand why these would have sinusoid capillaries. The liver produces a lot of large proteins that need to go into circulation. So the liver, if you can think of a hepatocyte being outside this capillary, and it's making some of these proteins, you want them to get into circulation efficiently. So the liver has sinusoid capillaries. We'll talk more about that another day. The spleen, we already know one important job of your spleen is to remove old, worn out red blood cells and platelets. So if this red blood cell is old, we got to get it out of there. We have to get it out of circulation. So in order to remove it from circulation, the spleen has sinusoid capillaries. And then finally, bone marrow is kind of the opposite. If you've got to make new red blood cells, and the new red blood cells are made in the bone marrow, they have to get into circulation. So how did this red blood cell get in that capillary? It had to have gone through one of these sinusoids, these larger holes, to get into circulation. So that's why the liver, spleen, and bone marrow have sinusoid capillaries. Finally, there's a fourth type of capillary that you learned about in A&P 1. They're called the blood-brain barrier, which is only found in your brain, obviously, and it's often referred to as a tight capillary because it doesn't allow much exchange. And the blood-brain barrier is formed by a specific type of cell called an astrocyte. The astrocyte kind of has these projections that form around the capillary, and this reduces the amount of material that can get into your brain, which is a pro and a con. The pro in that it prevents things from getting into your brain that shouldn't be, like toxins or pathogens. The con is if we want to get something into the brain, maybe a new medication, it might be very difficult to get certain chemicals into the brain because of this blood-brain barrier.